Today we have a special guest, Laurie Tims, and I'm so excited to be able to introduce her with you today. She is new here to be an interview, but she is certainly not new to Call to Peace Ministry. So she has been around for a while, and she actually serves as a Church Partnership Liaison. So, Laurie, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself? Maybe tell a little bit about you and what your role is as a Church Partnership Liaison, because I'm sure there's people watching who are like, "What is a Church Partnership Liaison?"
Yes. Well, my husband and I have 5 kids. We live in Iowa, and I grew up in domestic violence and in a home, in a church attending home where we also experienced verbal, emotional, spiritual, and at times physical abuse. As a church partner liaison, I actually started out a couple years ago wanting to meet with pastors, and I'm sorry, I'm seeing like the little thing on the side. It's got the people. That's so nice. Yeah, thanks for popping on, guys. So I started out just wanting to, just realizing the ways that teachings were used to keep people in abuse or used to abuse. And I wanted to share that with pastors because I didn't think that they maybe knew that. And so I started doing that on my own, and just a really neat journey to, through some church pastors to church administrators that led me to Call to Peace. The church administrator actually told me about Call to Peace Ministries. And so got introduced to Dan Beck and the awesome, amazing work that the church liaisons are doing to share with pastors and to teach pastors about domestic violence that's happening in the churches. So.
We're so grateful for our church partnership liaisons. Our church partnership liaisons are actually CTVM affiliated advocates with additional training and expertise in working with churches. So as she was mentioning, Dan Beck is our church partnership coordinator. And so he oversees, kind of like Brooke and Portia, those familiar with church advocate coordinators. He's our coordinator that oversees our church partnership liaison group. And we're so grateful for Laurie's work in what she does. And I'm looking forward to our today's conversation because we're going to talk about Laurie's story. Sometimes people are volunteering and serving with Call to Peace Ministries, but you may not know their story. You may assume they are a victim of domestic abuse themselves, but you may not know really when or how that looks or why they're passionate about this. And so today we're going to talk about Laurie's story, and she's going to share with you things that she's not shared publicly here before. Actually, she shared her story yesterday. So if you were reading yesterday, she just got live. So her story was published yesterday. And we're going to share that. And then also she is our guest speaker at our Vigil. As you know, we're in Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And this month we are talking about domestic abuse. And we're talking about the impacts of it. But today we're going to talk about the impacts of domestic abuse on children. And she's going to be a guest speaker at our Vigil. And so we're going to give snippets of what she's going to be talking about at the Vigil. She had journals, and I'm going to talk about why she's talking about this. So let's get into here before I go over and tell too much. I want you to be able to tell it. So let's start with, let's know your real story. You shared it yesterday on the blog. Let's share it for the first time.
Yeah. So, when I was born into a home, into a marriage of my parents and the domestic violence. And what I didn't understand as a kid was, I would hear my parents fighting, and the distress, the anxiety of that. And I didn't know as a child that, what was really happening with my dad wanting to exert that control over onto my mom. And, for her to constantly live under the burden of, the nitpicking, the controlling, the criticism, really wanting to remake her into the image that he had for her. How he wanted to change her, how he wanted her to be. And so when you live like that, it's suffocating and it's oppression. And then with the anger on top of that, there's the eggshells that you have to walk on to try to not rock the boat. Well, I think that might have been, and if I can kind of speak for my mom, I think she was more of a not rock the boat person. I was not. So I was born into this, and I was not, I did not appreciate the treatment that we received from my dad. Over time, I was able to discern that it was not a mutual thing. It was not, I think pastors and church leaders and our Christian community, we want to neutralize it and assign some kind of fault or blame onto both people for some kind of conflict. In fact, sometimes I've approached conflict, resolution is like trying to, well, what's my part in this? How can I claim some responsibility? And that's just not the case when there is abuse, when someone is trying to control and using different forms of manipulation and so forth to try to, an anger, physical, aggression, blocking people in corners and so forth, screaming, yelling, just anything to try to control the other person. And so, that's what I witnessed as a kid. I remember laying in bed at night, listening for a while that some kind of fight would start to rev up. We lived in a small home, and I would wait as long as I could until I would hear him just say vile things to my mom. And I would get up and I would scream and I would yell and I'd be like, don't say that, just, you can't say that. That's not true. And, so I was interfering, and he would always, get on me about my interfering and so forth. Did not like me to disrupt the abuse. He did not like me to disrupt his control. And that's what I did, was I disrupted it. And because I disrupted it and I resisted the abuse, I was called a, rebellious, non-Christian teenager, and a lot of, rebellion is the sin of witchcraft, which I didn't even know that was like where that was from until Rebecca Davis was untwisting that scripture for me. So I'm so thankful for her and her work. But that was a common thing that other people were, told that like they're participating in witchcraft when they rebel. And I wasn't rebelling against any kind of good authority. I was resisting the sinful, coercive control that was really idolatry on the part of my dad, who was trying to control.
Wow. And I love that you highlighted how he twisted all of that for you and what that was like for you as a kid, hearing them fight and how it impacted you. And so you knew as a child that this was wrong, and you felt in your spirit this is wrong. But did you have vocabulary for this? Did you know it was abuse as a child?
No. I knew it was wrong, but at the same time, remember, I did marinate in it. So I had, goodness. So my mom is amazing. I'm just so thankful for her. We have a really good, strong relationship. I got the message from, in my identity, I really believed for many years that I was bad, that I was, that I was wrong, that I was too mouthy and I was too this and too that as I was standing up, to my dad. But I also had voices like my grandparents. You're all right, kid. You're all right. And I just, there might've been an episode at their house with my dad, and, he's leaves the room, and, they give me that little encouragement. And so that was really great. Where was I going with? So did I have vocabulary? No, not until ninth grade. But at the time, I did not have vocabulary as a younger child. The one thing I wanted to make sure that I said is the way that, because I felt like I was just bad, I had a hard time understanding as I stood up to the abuse that I didn't feel like I could align, like I was disaligning myself with God, like Jesus, my savior. As I stood up to abuse, I was then, the narrative I was told is I was rebelling, and rebellion is a sin of witchcraft, and God hates rebellion, but I don't know that that's in the Bible anywhere. I couldn't find it. Maybe it is. So that like, as though God hates me then. Right. And so like, I'm rebelling, I'm not submitting to my dad. I'm not, respecting the way that he treats us. And so then I felt like I couldn't really be aligned with Jesus if I were not aligning myself with my dad and his narrative and his prescription for our family and how things should be exactly as he, would want it to be.
Wow. And I think that's really important to highlight, is how it impacted your faith. And
yes.
How it impacted your understanding of Jesus, because abusers are going to justify themselves and often the scripture. And as you've told me personally, your dad loved Jesus and talked about him.
He talks about Jesus all the time. What's the most important thing, Laurie? Live for Jesus. He talks about his grandma, talking about Jesus a lot. And my dad, 7 pages of the Bible, I don't know, like he would read 7 pages of the Bible in the morning. He's got his Bible reading place. He's got his quiet time. He would pray out loud in the morning for people, for health. He would also pray like towards what he wanted people to do. When someone's praying for you, there's the praying for you, but then there's like, please help this person lose weight. And just saying that kind of stuff out loud. Weight was a huge thing. Which also, and that's a whole other podcast. That's a whole other conversation about my own personal issues with, the ways I view myself and my body and everybody else, because there's that, you grow up marinating in that narrative that people are their weight, that's their value. Yeah. So I remember one time a new family moved to town, and my dad commented on one of the on the wife of the couple, and he said, well, it's nice that she keeps herself nice and trim, because then he won't be tempted to cheat on her and so forth. So I didn't tell you that personally, but yeah. So those kinds of thoughts and that just shaped a lot of how I ultimately viewed myself and my value as a woman, as a person. My dad has 3 daughters, and so that certainly affected us.
And I think this is also important to highlight, is that abusers 50 to 70% of the time also abuse children. It's very rare that an abuser is not impacting his children, especially his daughters, in this way, shape, or form, and how he's viewing their mother and putting her down. And so I'm glad you're highlighting that. Yeah. It's very rare that's not happening as well.
Yes.
And I think that's also great that you're pointing out how this is impacting your view of God as a child. Your dad is professing Jesus, but yet he's hurting your mother. You don't have words for what this is. You just know it's hurting her. And so this is what's inside, creating this internal conflict. And what's really cool about this is our surprise, y'all. We'll be sharing during our vigil. She kept journals.
Yeah.
Do you want to show them your journals?
Well, yeah, I've got my little one. This is from when I was 10. And then I've gone back and like labeled them just for my own records and so forth. But, and then the next one, and then I moved into Mead notebooks. I was really big on these. So I have like 30 journals, but from my childhood, I don't know, probably like 8 or something like that. And it's really, I used to feel like it was keeping a record of wrongs to keep these journals and to keep the narratives of what life was like and what happened. And then I would also feel kind of melancholy. I wouldn't go back and look at them very often, but I would feel kind of melancholy until a couple of years ago when I started understanding domestic violence and coercive control more, and understanding kind of what happened to us. And then it just, like, reading them is sad, but it just made things make sense. And then I could see the manipulation, and I could see how, he was trying to say all these, oh my gosh, I was like a, straight A, no boys, no drinking, whatever, kind of kid. I think I did have some drinks at some point with this one person. I found it in my journal with this lady I used to babysit for. Anyway, okay, shouldn't share that. But I was not one of those, kids typically. And my dad, he would call me a slut. And wait, can I say that? I don't even know. Okay,
yeah.
It's like on media, and other names like that. And at the time, I just had such an attitude. I was like, I'm clearly not that, like, duh. But as an adult, I realized he was trying to hurt me. He was trying to hurt me so that I would then do whatever, he wants me to do or say, whatever was going on. He just wanted to hurt me for control and manipulation. And so, it's just, I don't know. Anyway, so yes, I have these journals. Would you like me to read this one entry that I have?
Yes, and then we're going to have her read an entry, but I want to share during the vigil, she's going to share journals and going to read several of them, but we want to save that for the vigil. So we're kind of giving a backstory now so you understand where she's coming from. But I did ask her if she could read one journal entry that she will be reading during the vigil. So it's not giving it away. And I feel like it's just really shows how this impacts a child's view of God. So I'm going to let you go ahead and read that.
Yeah, it's really powerful for that. That abuse is a gospel issue. And I heard that phrase from a pastor one time, and I went and, saw this, and I was like, oh my goodness, this illustrates it so well that is really true. So as a 16-year-old, I wrote, right now, my faith is faltering. I'm having trouble believing. I've got so many uncertainties about Christianity. When Dad does the things he does and talks the way he does and yells at me for reacting the way I do and saying I'm not acting like a Christian by not liking the way he treats me or treats people, my mom and my sisters, I don't know if I want to be a Christian if that's what it's like and what it is. I don't know what I'm trying to say. I do want to be a Christian, but if he can treat me and mom like he does and get away with it without me being angry or upset and getting called a wicked, rebellious, non-Christian teenager, then I don't want to have anything to do with it. As I was reading that, what I'm thinking about right now is the control of calling me a non-Christian, because we were raised in a home where we learned about Jesus. Very early on, I accepted Jesus because I did not want to go to hell. It wasn't because, I loved Jesus and he was just amazing. That part was not really what was, communicated to me at that time. It was really about avoiding hell. And my faith has matured and grown since then. But for him to say, for him to kind of constantly, it was sort of like it was a manipulation or a put down to be like, well, you're not even a Christian. You're not even acting like a Christian. It was a way to control. And I think that's the paramount spiritual abuse, when you use someone's faith to try to control them. When you take, you teach them about God, and then you want them to have faith in Jesus, but then you take that and you twist it and you try to put them down with it and beat them over the head with it.
Wow. I think that's so powerful. I appreciate you sharing all that so vulnerably with us and how that impacted. It's definitely beating you down. And I'm also wondering too, at the same time, about your mother and maybe how the church is perceiving this, because you're a church partnership liaison. And so there's a reason for that. Why are you passionate about this? And I'm thinking about your mother. Was she aware that these things were going on? And how did your church see these things? Did you try to reach out to your church ever? Can you talk a little bit more about those type of things? I know there's a couple questions there. So let's just start with the first one.
Wow. That's, I think the most heartbreak, I can get called those names, all day, fine. But for me to watch my mom suffer in that was the most painful part of domestic violence, of growing up in domestic violence, whether it was the physical stuff and him pinning her down and screaming in her face and making her admit something about something, or that, him wanting to change something about her body or whatever. That was the most painful part. And my mom, she went to nursing school when I was in junior high school and high school. And she learned about the abuse cycle and some things about abuse through her nurse's training. But she still stayed for 2 more decades because she knew that the training she was getting was secular. And so she was in a very conservative church fellowship that I'm just going to say, didn't seem to recognize verbal and emotional abuse, and might have recognized physical abuse, but the physical abuse stopped when I was 18 and I had gone to police multiple times, ended up getting charges pressed. And, my dad had 2 years of probation, batter's education class, anger management classes. And there was some family counseling in there somewhere, but I don't really remember. It was very short-lived and not effective. But the physical abuse did stop. So it stopped for the most part. I think there was maybe an incident after that, but because of the threat of police. But the physical abuse might stop, but the entitled heart doesn't just disappear. And that was not, that wasn't addressed. That wasn't, I don't think that there were safe avenues. And there was some switching around of churches around the time I was 18, 19. But in their newer church environment, in which they continued for, more than 2 decades, there wasn't accountability. And I think in that space, my dad found refuge for his extreme beliefs about submission and headship, that, all of his preferences should be adhered to, and just the way you dry your hands after you wash dishes or whatever. Like, it's just like everything was had to be, a certain way, or you just get argued with and hounded and criticized and so forth. So I'm sorry, I'm kind of trailing from your question, but I long for church communities to understand the way they're teaching is twisted and applied by abusive people who want that coercive control. I ask them to hold plenty of space for that to be happening, and also to provide a path of righteousness for victims who are suffering in that. Like, if the church is talking about abuse from the pulpit, if they're defining and describing abuse from the pulpit, then women will have confidence, or the vulnerable, whoever is being abused, would have confidence that they might be listened to and believed, and that they would have vocabulary. We had a new community pastor in a prior church that came. I don't remember exactly his title, but I was a teenager, 14, 15. And I thought, oh, wow, like I could maybe get some help. I think he was adult Sunday school pastor. So I talked to him in the church lobby as a teenager. I didn't have the vocabulary, and he missed it, just, went over his head, didn't understand it. But if church pastors are trained, if they were trained on, looking for the signs, or listening to the messages that the vulnerable or victims aren't saying, because it's very, it's very difficult to come forward and tell a story about what you're experiencing, because there is a lot of doubt that you'll be believed, or there's often, the advice, pray, stay, lay, obey, that, we talk about it, called to peace, that, that kind of advice that women are given. It's all about what they need to do, instead of anybody reaching in and empowering them to get away from, avoid, have nothing to do with an abusive person. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I answered your questions in there or not. I just kind of rambled.
No, that was really helpful. And I'm just tracking through everything that you're saying here, is that your mother became aware of domestic abuse.
Yes.
You were 18, but because of the conservative church, she couldn't even recognize it as domestic abuse. I mean, because I can relate to that. When you're in very conservative circles,
right?
It's hard when the Bible is given authority, wrongly so,
right?
As these areas of your life are supposed to be controlled by your spouse.
Yes. And I think, what she had shared, that in visiting with someone there, asking, is this a submission issue if I'm drinking this beverage, this Diet Pepsi? Is this a submission issue if I drink this or not? And the quote was, well, that just has to get worked out in individual marriages. Instead of recognizing that is wrong, instead of recognizing that's coercive control, that's someone trying to control something that they should not be controlling, sinfully trying to control, her beverage choice. And for, it would just be wonderful if the church body could recognize that, and instead of, I don't know, but I think they just look, well, the Bible says submission in everything, so everything includes whatever you drink, so I guess you just have to follow along if that's what your husband, I don't know, but this is just what I'm imagining is happening there. And the other thing I wanted to say about, what I heard for 2 decades after the physical abuse stopped is she would say, well, the verbal and emotional abuse, like she didn't feel like she had grounds to leave for those 2 more decades because the physical abuse had stopped. And so then I'm kicking myself like, well, if the physical abuse were still going on, instead of me having, gotten police intervention, then maybe she would have gotten away when she had the means, because after nursing school, she would have had the means, to have, a different home, a different dwelling, and to leave. But sorry, Mom, if I'm saying too much.
Is your mom watching?
Oh, of course. I'm sure she is.
I love that. That is so precious. Hi, Mom. I mean, Laurie's mom. Yes. And I love that you're sharing all of this stuff, because I think it's so important for pastors to understand when you say things like her choice of beverage. Like, somebody on the outside may be like, oh, that's a nitpicky issue. But those are just little nuances that when you're trained on domestic violence, that's a key right then and there. There's a lot more behind the scenes this person's controlling.
Right.
That's not the one thing. It's something else so much bigger. They're just giving you a tiny tip of their iceberg, like a little tiny peek of what's going on underneath their home. And so when they're asking about submission questions like that, it's where our training is so helpful. Is, as pastors say, they've been through Protect the Flock training. They're like, once you see it, you can't unsee it. You start hearing these things and you're like, oh, and then you start questioning and you find out that, there is a massive abuse issue going on in your home. And I can't imagine the weight that must have felt for you to be like, and her, when the physical abuse stops. And then you feel like, well, emotional and verbal abuse aren't grounds. But the thing is like, physical abuse, I think, is so important for people and pastors to understand this. Physical abuse only happens when they can't control you through emotional and verbal abuse. So just find better ways to cut you and to hurt you emotionally and spiritually. It's going to increase more. It's going to flip around. It's just how the insidious nature of it works. And so they send them, as your pastor thinks, send them to batterer intervention program, and now they don't hit her. Well, now he's probably way more verbally and emotionally abusive than he ever was before, because he has to amp that up, because he doesn't have physical abuse as a tool in his tool belt anymore, sadly.
Right.
And I think that's really important to highlight. And I love what you're doing with church partnership work is, and I would like to talk about this because we're not taking this in the Vigil, is in your story, to give a little background, is you went to a church pastor and you reached out to them. Tell me just a little bit about that.
Over multiple contacts with church pastors to try to understand and to try to explain, what was going on, and to try to get help. I was really looking for protection and accountability. And ultimately, I love my dad. I have compassion for him. I grieve for the life that he lives today. And I long for the theology and the twistedness to be corrected in him. I don't know, I haven't been told, as I've asked, I don't know to what degree they have attempted to correct the theology about the control, that he is to be in control of the family, in those ways. And we're all grown up now too. But yeah, I long for that to be corrected so that we could potentially have a safe relationship. But yeah, I am done. I am done in that fellowship, trying to speak or communicate with them. There's nothing more, you just have to walk away at some point. So I grieve that. I lament. I feel like there's a kind of even an entrapment for him, because the people that I believe should be, holding that accountability, I don't know what's happening. I can't say, I don't know what's happening, because I haven't been communicated with. I have had multiple requests, that some accountability could happen, and I don't know.
Yeah.
But we have not seen any kind of change, and the same ideas of forgiveness, and even text messages within the last couple of weeks. The idea of my dad's idea of forgiveness is not isn't correct. You just start over from today. We'll move forward without, taking care of every month. If every month there was a tornado that comes through and damages things, like, you can't just move forward from that. So because the entitled heart and the controlling things are still there, the bitterness and the of what the destructive person thought they should have been entitled to is still there, because that hasn't been corrected.
Wow. I think all of that is very important to share, and for women listening to, and pastors to understand that you have to deal with the heart. And unless the heart has been dealt with, it just continues. And I am very grateful that, too, as churches understand as well, I feel like the need to say is like, their heart's changing. I just want to say, and a little tidbit in, like, as far as dealing with abusive men's hearts and working with that, it takes about 3 to 5 years of work, intense work with somebody trained in coercive control and is well aware of the dynamics. And then they have to show sustained change. So we're talking years, years of sustained change. And really, his wife would probably be the only one who could really tell you, and his children, tell you if that man has changed or not, because they know. And the pastor is saying, like, no, she's not forgiven. No. They know deep inside. They know his tactics. They know the ins and outs. And truly, they know if he's changed or not. And it's very rare that he will actually be willing to get rid of the entitlement, because why do they like it? It gets them what they want. Right. We're selfish at the core, and we do it to get what we want. So I appreciate you highlighting that, because I feel like I wanted to highlight that for pastors and church leaders who may be watching, is the importance of understanding the heart behind these men and how challenging.
Right. And that's why that typical advice of stay, pray, lay, obey doesn't work, because you're just feeding them what they want, and you're affirming the entitled, spirit, versus following the Bible and setting down the boundaries that God, has placed, the provision and protection that he has in his word to stay away from, avoid, and have nothing to do with someone who has a pattern of this kind of abusive behavior. And so I just want us to start empowering the victims from the pulpit with what God's word says to do, versus the unhealthy, advice that's been given to women for generations.
Yes. And that's what you're doing as a church partnership liaison. And
it's such a privilege.
I think everybody here can see, like, why you're so passionate about this, for a church to understand this. Because when we often say at Called to Peace Ministries, and I'm sure you agree with this, is that when a church sides against the mother and says, I don't see any abuse going on. And as your story stated, your mother was said, well, I didn't see your mother be respectful either. That stuff hurts.
Yeah. Yep. It does hurt. It hurts a lot. And I think that that's part of my healing journey, because I can't control them, and I can't control what their opinions are. And so being able to, heal and try to move beyond it. And I'm in a position where I can move beyond and move away from, and, not be in proximity there. But, there's some people who may not feel like they have that choice. And I don't know. It's hard.
Yes. And I appreciate the work that you're doing too, as well, to help churches understand the importance of this, because they may think, as we're mentioning, impacts children, but they may think, okay, well, it's just emotional verbal abuse, and I'm not downplaying that, or think that, oh, it's not a problem in their congregation, or it's no big deal. But you have to understand that this impacts a mother, it impacts her children, and it impacts future generations. And until we become aware of this and are willing to give survivors of abuse a voice from the pulpit by acknowledging it, and by preaching and teaching, not just saying occasionally abuse is wrong, because that doesn't define what abuse is, but being
right. Abuse is a big, scary word. So if they just say abuse from the pulpit, like, people don't know what that is. And so that's why my big things have been define and describe abuse from the pulpit. And I've been so thankful for Called to Peace. Like, I feel so invested in by the liaison team, by Dan Beck, and just everybody on that team. And I'm just really, it's just such a privilege, because I I was out there by myself, like just trying to whatever. And then I'm so thankful that God led this path so that I could find what you're doing, because you're doing everything that I want to do and then teaching me how to do it way better than I was. I still have gobs of room to grow in how I approach pastors and talk with them and all of those things. But I've just learned so much. I'm so thankful to not be alone. So thankful to not be alone.
Yes, and we're so grateful for the work. And I was looking at our statistics yesterday. We have impacted 143 churches in 2023.
Wow.
143 just in this year.
Awesome.
Not even done with the year yet. We're still in our peak season of Protect the Flocks. We have one going on this weekend. It's every single weekend all over the United States, and are partnering with churches and partnering with organizations and helping them create safe communities for women and children impacted by domestic abuse. Because if the abuser is abusing the mom, he's more than likely abusing the kids. And even as we taught one of our things, if children, you think they're not aware of what's going on at home, even if it's just emotional verbal abuse, children are impacted.
Oh yeah,
are aware. They know
we hear it. We hear it.
Yeah, and they sense it and they feel it, and they know their mother's afraid, and they know their mother's scared. And that impacts them.
And the ways that it impacts the mother as she shows up to be a mother, if she's under the oppression and under the confusion and frustration, it makes it more difficult for her to flourish as a mom.
So what would you say to churches listening today? Why is it important to take domestic abuse seriously and maybe partner with Call to Peace? And that may seem like a scary step for pastors, but we start with Protect the Flock trainings. So you can get a 4 to 6 hour training that's a bit for you. So why was that important? Why should they take that first step?
Well, it's impacting children, it's impacting families, and it's a really trying to take for a pastor alone to try to take on domestic violence and understand like just the different ways to provide caveats or teaching from the pulpit can be a really scary, daunting thing. But Called to Peace has this just wonderful, just the jumpstart training of Protect the Flock to get that initial information. And then there are quarterly roundtables where information is presented by, a group of survivors who are, advocates and liaisons. I'm on a team that's working on some presentations by Dan Beck and Andre, Dr. Deborah speaks there. Joy does at times. And, so just that continued training and encouragement, because it's messy. It is really, really messy. It is so, pastors are bogged down by so many different issues and people wanting, them to speak about this or that. And so I get that. Like it's hard. One of the things I think that could be a little different about domestic violence is that it's not just that I want them to put teaching on top of what they're already teaching, but it's about getting under at the roots to understand that some of the things that they are already teaching, like the way that it's, the way that things are being taught sometimes really does inadvertently pin people down in abuse. And so, just to have Called to Peace walk alongside the pastors would just be an incredible investment for, investment of time for the churches and for their congregations, because 1 in 3 women and 1 in 6 men are experiencing domestic violence within their homes. A lot of times what shiny happy people is going to come out of my mouth. So that's a different thing. But, just the idea that when in church, we're presenting a lot of times what we end up seeing are those, best foot forward things. And it's there, it's present in their congregations. Once they start speaking about it, they will see people coming forward. I visited with a ministry leader on Monday, and she said that the pastor gave a sermon about spiritual abuse, and they got tons of messages and emails where people were recognizing it. And when you recognize something, then you deal with it either as a perpetrator, because sometimes perpetrators do hear and see and say, oh, I'm not entitled to do that. I'm not entitled to behave that way. They could possibly change. And then victims being able to hear the instruction and understand it could, search for that path of righteousness out of that abusive situation.
Thank you. And I appreciate you so much sharing that and sharing so much about Call to Peace. And we're so grateful for each and every one of you on the team, Dan Beck and everybody. I'm like, I don't even know who to start naming. There's so many people that are involved in this. I'm thinking of just like Rebecca Soderton. There's so many people that are so connected in doing this work and are just partnering together to say our passion is for churches. And I love it. There's so many volunteers that do this work. And part of Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And I want to say Laurie's going to be at our vigil. So please come to our vigil on October 26th at 8 p.m.
I'm excited.
Hear her actual scripts from her journal entries. It's going to be a 5-minute, 7-minute talk that shares more in depth what we share.
And just so much education right in that vigil, right? Because Leslie Vernick's going to be there, Elise Fitzpatrick, Darby Strickland. They're going to be speaking about and bringing the education pieces and the spiritual pieces to this. So I just think it would be such a great primer for people to participate, to listen.
Yes, it's going to be incredible. So I hope everybody can come. It's going to be live on our Facebook. Yeah. And so that's a huge thing. And then also I want to say that it is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and it is our largest campaign of the year. And while we have so many volunteers and people that are working alongside us, we also have expenses when we do protect the flocks. Mm-hmm. And part of that right now is we're fundraising so that we can continue to serve the 140 churches that had reached out for help and been able to host Protect the Flock. Now there's more than one church at Protect the Flock at times. That doesn't mean we've done 140 Protect the Flocks this year. Mm-hmm. But the way it costs us $400 to host one Protect the Flock with the flights and the traveling and the everything else in the organization. It's not free, but we offer it free of charge to churches because donors say, this is important to me. I believe in investing in churches. And so they partner with us financially. And so I invite you today, you say, hey, I'm listening. It's Domestic Violence Awareness Month. I want to see churches change. I want to see things happen. Partner with us financially. $400, like I said, will cover one Protect the Flock training. It covers, I think it's another amount. I can't remember it right off. I think it's $1,600. Covers I think it's several consultations. That's done by Dan Beck. He mentors churches one-on-one. He works for us full-time and is a pastor, retired pastor. And he mentors churches and walks alongside them. And so the money that you give goes directly to support that work. So I just invite you to partner with us and make a difference in the lives of children and women that are impacted by this abuse. We can't do this without you. We do this together and see our partners as people that have joined alongside us and are literally locking arms with us and walking with us in this. So we invite you into that today, and please come to our vigil.
Yes.
It's October 26th, 8 p.m. You will hear Laurie's story. You're going to hear other information. It's going to be incredible, y'all. It's going to be a live music video too, by the way, of Laurie.
Estelle.
Yes, is singing a new song she's releasing. So it's
wow.
Yeah, it's
awesome.
Phenomenal. You're going to be blown away. Y'all want to be there. Thank you guys for joining us today. And we will see you soon at the vigil next week on Thursday. 1 week from today.
Thank you, Lauren, so much.
Thank you.